Big picture thoughts here on Monday morning. I did what any normal, longtime fan of Rutgers football would do after a loss like Saturday's against Nebraska, 14-7. I cleaned my basement. I reorganized my basement on Sunday. Deep thoughts while doing so, and wanted to share some of those here as we move on to Wisconsin week. A huge opportunity for Rutgers. Also wanted to, I'm kind of combining two episodes I normally do with recapping the Big Ten. So I'm going to go through the results, look at the next week's schedule for the conference, and then share some of my thoughts on Rutgers, which is tied to the fact that the Big Ten is wide open. And that's why I just am harping on this loss as such a missed opportunity, but plenty of opportunity still ahead. So let's look at the results from this past weekend. Opened on Friday night. Oregon defeated Michigan State at home 31-10. Oregon now 5-0, 2-0 in the Big Ten, setting up that huge showdown this coming weekend against Ohio State, which we'll get to. Then Ohio State took care of business at home against Iowa. Not even close. Iowa drops its first Big Ten game, 3-2 overall. Ohio State as well, 5-0, 2-0, 35-7. Will Howard, 4 touchdown passes. Caleb Johnson held under 100 yards for Iowa, arguably the best back in the Big Ten. Penn State, relatively ho-hum victory at home against UCLA, 27-11. They're now 5-0, 2-0. They have a huge game coming this weekend as well in the conference at USC. UCLA drops to 1-4 overall, 0-3 in the Big Ten, comes to Piscataway in 2 weeks. You had, Michigan, as I said, I think Washington's going to beat Michigan. They did. Michigan going to plummet down through the polls, now 4-2, 2-1 in the Big Ten. Washington 4-2, 2-1. They beat Michigan 27-17, had a huge fourth quarter, 13 points. Will Rogers, 21 of 31, 271 yards, 2 touchdowns. Big game for him. The big receiver, Boston, had 80 yards and a touchdown. So they were trailing going into that fourth quarter, and they were able to overcome Michigan. So that win over Washington stands tall, and I think is going to show up even better as the year goes on. Minnesota beating number 11 USC at home. PJ Fleck needed that win. It was their first conference win. They're now 1-2 in the conference, 3-3 overall. USC dropping to 3-2, 1-2 in Big Ten play, and they have a huge home game against Penn State this week. So big win for them in terms of their running back, Taylor. He had 144 rushing yards. They really controlled the ball at the ground. They also came back, had a 14-0 fourth quarter after trailing. There was talking about the Shiano, the Kyle Monungai touchdown that wasn't. Minnesota had a similar situation, and people are, criticizing Shiano and crediting Fleck for how he handled it by calling a timeout and kind of forcing a review. I'm not so. We'll get into it again, but I don't really blame Shiano there. I don't. We'll talk about what his answer was, but anyway, Minnesota winning big, or having a big victory for them at home against USC. Indiana goes on the road. They're rolling under Kirk Cignetti. They beat Northwestern 41-24. Now 5-6-0, 3-0 in the Big Ten. Unbelievable start for them. Northwestern drops to 2-3, 0-2 in the conference. Wisconsin coming to Piscataway this weekend. Huge win at home. Obviously, Tyler Van Dyke, their starting quarterback, is out. Ches Malusi, their best running back, just kind of, I don't know if he's medically retired, but he's taking a break. And he wasn't in the game, but they rolled over Purdue, which is the worst team in the Big Ten, unquestioned. Their backup quarterback now, Locke, had 359 passing yards, 3 touchdowns. Walker had 94 yards and 3 touchdowns. I mean, they dominated in every way against Purdue. High-powered offense in that game. Phil Longo, offensive coordinator. Rutgers fans have longed for him before. He'll be in Piscataway with the Badgers and Luke Fickell. Huge game on Saturday. And then obviously Rutgers losing to Nebraska. So let's look ahead now to this schedule for week 7. Big week, a lot of showdowns in this conference. It starts on Friday. Northwestern at Maryland, 2 teams that desperately need a win, that have not gotten one in league play so far. Northwestern 2-3 overall, 0-2 in the league. Maryland 3-2, 0-2 in the league. That is a Friday night game on Fox. Maryland's a 10-point favorite. And obviously you need that win. I talked about, I thought Maryland was due a step back this year with Mike Loxley losing their longtime quarterback and with Tyler Vola. And it's, this is obviously an opportunity. I mean, they had great quarterback play so far with Edwards, 14, almost 1,500 yards passing, 11 touchdowns, just 2 interceptions, but it hasn't translated in big games. So this is a huge game for Maryland. And then you have Washington at Iowa. That's a fascinating game. Iowa's a 3-point favorite. Washington 2-1 in the league. Iowa 1-1. And that is a big showdown. Obviously, Will Rogers, I mean, his stats are great. Over 1,600 yards, 12 touchdowns, 1 interception. And Rutgers did such an amazing job on Raiola. And I think facing Will Rogers the week before, although they're different style quarterbacks, I think it really helped. And it's also important to note, I think they probably played the 2 toughest quarterbacks they're going to face all year in the last 2 weeks. So that is going to help this defense as well. And then in addition, the 2 big showdowns I mentioned, Penn State, number 4 now in the AP at USC. They are 5.5-point road favorites playing in the Coliseum. That's a 3:30 kickoff on CBS. You have Illinois hosting Purdue. Illinois still number 23 now, still ranked 4-1 overall, 1-1 in Big Ten play. They had a bye last week. And then Ohio State at Oregon. Game of the week across college football. Number 2 Ohio State at number 3 Oregon, both 5-0, 2-0. And then Minnesota with a huge opportunity at UCLA, 3-3, going at UCLA. So I mean, PJ Fleck can get some momentum there if they can win that road game. Minnesota's favored 5.5 on the road. That OSU, Ohio State at Oregon. Ohio State's actually favored by 4 points. That's going to be just a powerhouse game. And obviously, in terms of the matchup, there's going to be plenty said about it, but that will, those are the 2 best teams in the league. I don't think it's close. I think Penn State's at number 3. I'm not going to do, power rankings today, but I think that it's clear that Ohio State and Oregon are the 2 best teams. So whoever wins this game obviously has a clear leg up. They could have a rematch in the Big Ten title game in December. And with the expanded playoff, I mean, both are still, win or lose, both will be in good shape to be on course for the college football playoff. So talking about Rutgers, I wanted to mention and kind of go through a few things, just touching off my rapid reaction that came out after the game. And obviously, everyone was emotional to this game. It was a visceral loss. And I wanted to just kind of peel apart a few things. We talked about the play calling. We talked about some decisions made. I think overall what's just frustrating was that the defense had its best game of the season by far, and then the offense had its worst game of the season by far. Now, by the way, I annoyed Nebraska fans for not praising their defense enough. I did say pretty prominently that the defensive front beat up the Rutgers offensive line and obliterated them, and that Hutmacher was a beast. I mean, they had several great performances. But yeah, the defense was great. But when you do a rapid reaction, you're focusing on your team and what happened. But I did acknowledge that the Nebraska defense was very good. But I also felt like there were some self-inflicted wounds from Rutgers. And the Rutgers defense played incredible too. So just in terms of, one thing I had in my notes that I forgot to mention was like that second interception that Callie McManus threw near the end of the first half. That was a total rush in terms of he stumbled on the run and he rushed to get back to the huddle and snapped it really quick. And he really never reset himself. And then he forced a bad decision, made a bad throw. And I just felt like there was that lack of control in the pace of the offense. They just seemed out of sorts. And you know what? Bad days happen. And you could chalk it up to that. And let's hope that this offense bottomed out with that performance. That would be certainly encouraging. If this was, rock bottom in terms of the offensive performance. I know alarm bells have gone off in terms of, is the offense going to be an issue now? I don't think that performance, I haven't lost faith in them. It was just a very, very frustrating thing to watch where the game really was for the taking. And I think, there's a lot of, we talk about play calling, but it also was obviously an execution issue. But, I think Callie McManus, in terms of his reading the defense and reading the call in terms of adjustments he could make, I think there were issues there. But I also think there were play design issues, not just the play call. If you go back to that goal line opportunity, and I know people are still really upset about the officials not reviewing the Kyle Monungai touchdown that wasn't. Greg Schiano saying in the press conference that he was told that the officials reviewed it in the booth and that it wasn't a touchdown, and there was nothing he could do at that point. It's not, you can't coaches challenge it. It's not the NFL. He could have called a timeout, and would that have forced them to make a full review? I don't know. I mean, the timing from when the first when the play happened to when Rutgers snapped it again, I mean, it felt pretty quick, 15, 20 seconds maybe. So that feels very fast in terms of the officials getting back to him. But that's what, he said why he didn't call a timeout, because they told him that it wasn't a touchdown. Now, there's some people that are saying maybe his shin bone was down, maybe his ankle, whatever. It was obviously close. I think the bottom line is, and I mean this sincerely, like, yes, there were some frustrating calls in this game, but there's always frustrating calls in games. And Rutgers is never, it's always going to feel like they don't get the benefit of the doubt. And I talked about making your own luck in the rapid reaction. And, Rutgers wasn't playing well. And I truly feel like you make your own luck and you don't get the benefit of the doubt when you're making a lot of mistakes. And the thing is, when you have that many plays at the goal line, 6 or 7, I think it was 7 plays from scrimmage inside the 5 or inside, and you can't score, like, you can't blame the refs. You really can't. And going back to play design, Nebraska was all over Kenny Fletcher in terms of that action that they've been running for him, in terms of the rollout and on that goal line play, there was no disguise. That was the primary option. And between how Calais McManus took the snap, made the read, and went to Fletcher, there was the outside receiver. I forget who it was, but like there was no, slant or action to kind of, confuse the defense or create the defense to have to react. It was simply just putting, rolling Calais McManus out to Fletcher, and it didn't fool anybody. And then on that last play with the 2 receivers out left, the slant, and the screen, that the pick that was set, the defensive back never moved. Like, there was nothing to, like, that was, I think, a bad read. I think you could argue it was maybe a bad play design as well, or just a bad play call, all 3. But it's more complicated. It's not just, Chirac making bad calls. It's not just Calais McManus, making the wrong reads. I thought some of the play designs of the plays that were called in those situations just kind of were off. I think everybody just had a really bad day. I said Chirac was really good up to this point in the season, but there was a lot of just kind of head scratchers there. Now, the positive, we saw some good performances from young receivers, KJ Duff, Ben Black. Obviously, Black did have that unfortunate drop that, when you score, what happens after is going to be different than what actually happened, right? So you can't just say they would have won if he caught that, or, the safety, the block punt, if Loyal would have been able to get in, or Rutgers got in on that goal line. You never know how the dynamics of the game are going to change, but obviously that was a huge drop. But he came back and made a great touchdown catch. He showed promise in this game. KJ Duff showed promise in this game. So 2 true freshman receivers making an impact. Ian Strong, certainly not healthy, gutted it out, had a 10-yard catch, but I thought that was a huge thing, because I thought going into this game, he was gonna be a big target, and he was going to be able to take advantage of some of the smaller defensive backs that Nebraska had, and him being severely limited, I think, really hurt. And maybe it changed Chirac's thought process a little bit in terms of not having Strong available. But what was interesting, and credit to Mike Broadbent of the Night Report, they do a great job over there. Obviously, we've collaborated before. He pointed out that statistically, Calais McManus has been much more efficient throwing the ball out of play action versus straight dropbacks. And I think it's like close to 70% in terms of efficiency on play action. And obviously, I forget exactly what it was for the year, but in this game specifically, they only had 5 play actions. They were 5 of 5. And then the rest, I mean, he was like 40% under that, in terms of all those other dropbacks. So it's just curious that we complain that they abandoned the run, but even in the pass plays they ran, they didn't really call things to their strength. And maybe there was something that Nebraska was taking away. Again, there's a lot that it's easy to kind of backseat drive here and pick things apart. The point is that, whatever it was, whether they felt Nebraska was taking the play action away, they weren't able to find things that worked. And again, you have some promise from the young receivers. I think an issue that's happening here with Strong hurt, right, or playing limited, DeAndre Miller, unfortunately, has not produced like the number one receiver we all hoped he would. Overall for the season, I mean, he's got 17 catches. He leads them with 262 yards. He's averaging a little over 3 catches a game, a little over 50 yards a game, which is okay, right? But for a number one receiver, they need more than that. And specifically, the last 2 games against Washington, Nebraska, he's got 4 catches for 50 yards total. He just has 1 touchdown, first game of the season. And again, this isn't to blame DeAndre Miller. I mean, there's a lot that goes into it, right? In terms of, how they're using him, how many calls he's the primary receiver. I haven't looked at targets yet. I'm going to look through that. I'll mention that later in the week. But just in terms of, if this is your number one receiver, you can line him up in various, slot, outside, whatever. You got to make him a priority, and they got to get DeAndre Miller going. I think that that's going to be a key moving forward, and specifically in this Wisconsin game, is to get DeAndre Miller going because he hasn't been the weapon that they need him to be in the pass game, especially when Ian Strong isn't 100%. It's great the young guys are stepping up, but, Chris Long hasn't really been consistent, and you need DeAndre Miller to really rise to the occasion here, and I think you'll see a focus there. I don't regret calling this an all-time regular season loss for Rutgers, because I think in the context of this season, in the context of this team, in the context of the Big Ten being wide open, people were saying, oh, it's not nearly as bad as when they lost to Kent State in 2012 or Cincinnati in 2006. Agreed. But it's in the neighborhood, because when you're undefeated past the first month of the season, you have something cooking. You have a special season potential. And that's why that Kent State loss was so crushing in 2012. They were 7-0. They lose that game. What do they finish? 9-4, right? The wheels didn't completely fall off, but your momentum of that undefeated run, you lose it. And once you lose it, weird things could happen, right? In 2006, they were 9-0. They go to Cincinnati. They lay an egg, right? They finish the season 2-2. Still a great season. We're not going to talk about the West Virginia triple overtime loss, but not today at least. But you see, my point is that the trajectory can change. And they were 4-0, and they had every opportunity to be 5-0 in a conference that is wide open, with a schedule that's extremely favorable, with a veteran team, a developmental program that you have so many seniors. It just hurts. It hurts. It's a missed opportunity every way you slice it. And that's why right after that game, and still now after my deep thoughts in the basement, it's one of those that we're always going to look back on as a missed opportunity. Now, the good news is there's plenty of opportunity ahead. And in an expanded play, I know people are like, hey, why are you talking about the playoff? I'm not saying it's necessarily realistic, but reality, there's still possible for them to have a truly special season and make the college football playoffs. Now, less likely to happen than happen, right? And you could argue that Nebraska is probably their second toughest game that was left on the schedule. They're going to USC, who, is vulnerable, just lost at Minnesota. They're much better at home than on the road. But Rutgers has a lot of winnable games ahead. And they just have to execute better. And if lessons can be learned, if things can be corrected, if this loss is a bottoming out at Nebraska from an offensive perspective, then you know what? There's benefit to what happened. And we'll look back on, there's a lot of ways we can look back on this loss. But the undefeated season's over. I know people felt like that was a pipe dream, but it wasn't. It wasn't until it was done. And whenever you have that first loss, the later it occurs in the season, the bigger impact it has. And I just felt like in terms of, we talked about 2012, 2006, like this was the best start since those two seasons. So to not have them go a little bit deeper, right, with the opportunity now with Wisconsin coming in, not going to be an easy game. Never beat Wisconsin. Should be a great crowd. Noon kickoff, BTN. And with Wisconsin and UCLA, a 2-game homestand now, you have so much opportunity, regardless of the loss. But imagine going in 5-0, 2-0 with these 2 games. Still, you can win these 2 games and be 6-1, 3-1, going to USC, which would be just a monster opportunity there. So all is not lost for sure. And I was very clear about don't give up on this team. And I think that was ultimately the most encouraging thing, is this team has a ton of heart. They fought to the bitter end. And you know what, Cali McManus, for the poor game he had, he's a warrior, you know, and I mentioned it. He wore his brace. We'll see what Shiano says on Monday's presser, but, you know, I personally think he looked like he's dealing with something, and he gutted it out. And, you know, he made some great throws at the end of that game. So you have to credit the toughness of this team. This team embodies the mantra of keep chopping, and that's what they're going to keep doing. And as fans, we have to keep believing in them. And I still think they can get to that 9-10 win mark. If the defense, you know, you can't expect them to play that good every day. But again, they just played 2 really difficult quarterbacks, right? And they didn't Nebraska didn't win because of Raiola, right? They held him under 50%. They held him to under 150 yards and no touchdowns and an interception. So the defense is really, I think, going to get confidence from that. I think we're seeing them kind of figure it out. And if the offense can be closer to what they've been prior to this game, if you can have that complementary football that Shiano always talks about, this team's going to win a lot more games. So plenty of reason to still be optimistic about this team. The Nebraska game is now behind us. But I do think in this season, right, in the context of next season, when you're losing so many players, when you have the schedule you have this year versus next year, when you have everything that's going on in the conference, every loss is going to be magnified this year because it's a missed opportunity. And the way in which they missed that opportunity, that's what was so frustrating. But like I said, high hopes for this team still. On to Wisconsin, huge opportunity. We'll have plenty to break down. I'll have David Anderson back this week. Thanks so much for listening and watching once again here at the Scarlet Faithful podcast.